power play. The state attorney general wielding a big stick through Lansing these days, including at her own party. So, what's her plan? And then there were two. The field of mayoral candidates narrowed this week by Detroit voters, although not very many of them. We're breaking down the head-to-head matchup that is now on tap. The discussion starts right now on an August 10th edition of Flashpoint. Happy Sunday, everybody. I'm Jason Colthorpe. The mayor's race is down to two in Detroit. Their finish may not have been much of a surprise, but the numbers certainly were. Mary Sheffield lapping the field with 51% of the vote, outpacing her previous percentage in a Local 4 Detroit News poll by 13 points. Solomon Kinloch Jr. also improved, just slightly, though, winning that second spot with 17%. What does he have to do now to make up a considerable deficit in just 90 days? And more importantly, what does Sheffield or Kinloch need to prepare for if they win? We're talking about it with former mayor and city council president Ken Cockrel Jr. But first, some are calling her the most powerful person in Lansing right now. She's taken on the utilities, former lawmakers, and now even an arm of the Whitmer administration. And they're both Democrats. She's Dana Nessel, the state attorney general. Is she setting herself up for a much bigger office next year? Let's ask her right now on Flashpoint. And here she is. Let's say good morning to Attorney General Dana Nessel. Thanks so much for being here. Always appreciated. I want to start, it feels like I have a ton to talk to you about, but I want to start with the MEDC and the investigation into that corporation and Fay Beydoun. Your office recently launched that investigation. What specifically triggered it, and what potential charges could come down the line there?
Well, you know, as Attorney General, it is my job to make sure that state tax dollars are being used appropriately, that the money's not being embezzled or misappropriated in any way. Now, let's be clear, what we're seeing in state government pales in comparison to the massive corruption at the federal level. But again, we want to make sure that state tax dollars are used wisely, and normally they are. But in this particular set of circumstances, you know, this investigation actually was launched as a result of reports in the media about how this grant money was being utilized. And we have other cases where we've investigated earmarks or grants. And so we thought it was necessary to pursue this as well.
That Detroit News article you're referring to also pointed that it all came about after the governor, Gretchen Whitmer, was the one who pushed for this grant, and it was kind of in the late hours of a budget negotiation. If the investigation takes you toward the governor's office, could that also be part of this?
Well, look, as of this point, I will definitely say that the governor's not a target of this investigation, but we are deeply concerned about what we're seeing from the MEDC, the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. This is a quasi-public, quasi-private agency that sort of operates outside the rules of normal state government. So I'll give you, for instance, we have a case involving the misappropriation of a grant that went through the Department of Health and Human Services. Mm-hmm. And when that happened, you know, DHHS, they were monitoring how the money was spent. They immediately notified us and the Auditor General and the Inspector General as soon as they saw that there was an issue. They, you know, cooperated in every portion of the investigation and now the prosecution. That's in stark contrast to the MEDC. You have money that gets funded through the Michigan Strategic Fund, then it goes to the MEDC. And this has happened for decades, starting with John Engler and his administration, where you have hundreds of millions of dollars, perhaps in a single budget year.
And sometimes people aren't keeping a close eye on it.
Yeah, exactly. So in terms of what their methodology is in terms of regulation, you know, seemingly, you know, in terms of conflicts of interest, the fact that Fay Beydoun was a board member of the MEDC and then received this massive grant, the fact that there's very little oversight, and you know, the fact that MEDC stonewalled our investigation into the, you know, misappropriation of this money for over a year, and now is in court trying to block us from a valid search warrant that was executed upon the agency. It's all deeply troubling. And again, you know, the vast majority of state money is appropriately utilized when there's an earmark or when it's appropriated. But money going through the MEDC has us deeply concerned, and each day we learn new things about this agency that lead me to believe that until there's better oversight, perhaps they shouldn't be receiving any state funds at all.
I know you say the governor's not a target of the investigation, but obviously it was her appointee, and you've criticized her recently for her trips to the White House. So I think many wonder, are you two at odds on this?
No, I wouldn't say that. Listen, this is my job, and I routinely investigate individuals, whether they're Democrats, whether they're Republicans, whether they're nonpartisan. When it comes to this type of criminal behavior, or I will say alleged criminal behavior, it is part of the work of our department. We have a public integrity division of the Department of Attorney General, and we take this job very seriously. We have seasoned investigators and prosecutors, and they're nonpartisan. They're just there to do their jobs, to make sure that the law is followed, and when it's violated, that, we're bringing charges. We should point out the state did officially cancel that grant, and although it's been reported the governor hired a defense attorney for both the chief of staff and the MEDC staff. You mentioned federal corruption. Let me quickly jump to that. Since Donald Trump came back into office, 26 lawsuits, I believe, is the number that you've either signed on to or filed yourself against the president. It's actually 29.
29 now.
Yeah.
You never know by the day. Your critics would say this is classic weaponization of your office against someone you just don't agree with politically.
Well, I think if people are saying that, it's because they don't know the nature of these lawsuits. And the vast majority of this litigation, this is money that, tax dollars that were paid by Michigan residents or Michigan businesses, went to the federal government and was congressionally allocated to come back to Michigan for all kinds of important programming. And then the Trump administration withheld the money from the state of Michigan. And so these are for things, like the funding of our schools, roads, infrastructure, our libraries, public health grants. The list goes on and on. So we have now recovered over $1.6 billion in money that was illegally, unconstitutionally withheld from the state of Michigan. And even when I talk to Republicans in the legislature, they might not say this publicly, but privately they'll say to me, we're so glad that you were able to recover that money. We were counting on that money. And again, I want to make it clear to everyone, that's our money.
Yeah.
That's money that Michigan taxpayers paid to the federal government.
Are these the funds that were said that are going to go directly back to the state, or at least promised by the administration, by bypassing, say, the Department of Education, for example? Or are these different funds?
It's a variety of funds.
Okay.
Some of it does involve the Department of Education, and that's been a number of our lawsuits. But, they've spanned across the spectrum of many different types of funding, including, FEMA, emergency, money for relief for when we have disasters.
Yeah.
We're talking about over $100 million that was illegally withheld from the state. We need that money. And again, Congress appropriated it to us. So the Trump administration can't just come in and say, we've decided unilaterally that Michigan's not going to get that money.
Let me grab a couple other topics here. Line 5 pipeline, where your office has, where does your office stand right now on possibly shutting down Line 5?
Well, we still have a case that is pending in the Ingham County Circuit Court before Judge Jamo, and motions for summary judgment there. We're waiting to see whether or not there's going to be a stay that's issued on the Circuit Court making a decision on that, because now a petition of certiorari has been granted by the United States Supreme Court on a related issue, not the exact same issue, but a related issue. So we're waiting to see if that'll move forward. But I will say this, the one thing I will give Enbridge credit for, I don't give them credit for trying to protect the Great Lakes or caring much about the safety, economic security of the state of Michigan, but I will give them credit for their stalling tactics. And I filed the case in 2019, and we don't even have a decision yet from a circuit court judge in this matter, which is of course one of the lower courts. expecting that this will, of course, go up to an appeal later.
People think it would explode our price at the pump, though, if it does get shut down one day. Is that not a concern?
No, not at all. And in fact, one of the first things that the governor did when she took office is to commission a study specifically on how those costs would be absorbed, what, for the same amount of energy that goes through Line 5, how we would make up for it. And they found that there was practically no price difference at all. So we know that's not true.
I want to talk about something you've talked about in the past. You fought consistently against the utilities, DTE, and consumers when it comes to price hike. The Detroit News reporting this week, the governor's newest appointee to the MPSC, Shaquilla Myers, is being called a victory for the utilities because previously she has privately, according to sources with the Detroit News, fought to help those utilities. Does that appointment worry you?
It's a concern to me. It's a concern because she replaced a board member who we thought cared deeply about consumers and also about environmental concerns. We know that there was a lot of proposed legislation when Joe Tate was Speaker that would have held the utilities accountable and would have made sure that you couldn't see this endless escalation year after year after year.
Can you answer in 5 seconds if you're going to run for a new office after next year?
No, I can't answer that question.
Oh, I thought we almost had an answer.
Listen, the job I have right now is the most important job I could be doing, and I'm concerned about doing anything that interferes with me doing my day job. But
so we have to wait and see.
You'll have to wait and see.
All right. Attorney General Dana Nessel, thank you. It's always a good time to talk to you. We're coming right back with more Flashpoint after this. Back here on Flashpoint to talk about the head-to-head matchup that's now in place to determine Detroit's next mayor. It'll be City Council President Mary Sheffield versus Reverend Solomon Kinloch Jr. of Triumph Church. And to help us break down the race, we have former mayor and City Council President Ken Cockrel Jr. Thanks so much for being here. It's great to talk to you about this. Were you surprised by the twosome we get here now?
No, not at all. The primary shook out pretty much the way I've been saying it's probably going to shake out and expecting it to shake out for months now. The only thing I think that surprised me a bit was the size of the margin of victory that Sheffield was able to achieve. Early
polls, it was much closer,
right.
But there were a lot of undecideds, and I think people thought, well, if Jenkins or Craig or whoever could grab some of those undecideds, and it seems like they almost all went to Mary Sheffield.
Pretty much.
Yeah. Now we have 87 days here. Walk me through. You've done this. You've been in this position where now you have this sprint to the next election. What are the candidates doing starting now?
Well, I think that both Sheffield, surprisingly, and Kinloch have a couple specific challenges that they've got to consider and deal with over the course of the next several weeks. First, for Sheffield, because her margin of victory was so big, I think she's got to really think about not getting overconfident and not getting too complacent, especially when you consider that this primary had very low voter turnout.
Very low, yeah.
And unfortunately, they kind of generally all do. Primary elections tend to not pull people out at any level of government. This was especially low, so there's still a substantial amount of the electorate out there that just didn't weigh in on this. So I think she's got to really think strongly about, holding fast, but also not getting overconfident, not getting cocky, because there are a lot of people that looked at that race and said she's got it in the bag.
Which she didn't do in the primary, I thought, because I think she ran the most TV ads, so she didn't rest in that.
Right. Now, Kinloch's challenge really is that he is so far behind, he has really got to motivate and engage his voters and try to convince them that this isn't a wrap, that it's not over. I mean, if I'm him, I'm looking at it from the standpoint of, how can I effectively raise money at this point when a lot of people may say, dude, you don't have a shot?
Yeah.
So he's really got to think about what he can do to close that gap.
When you look at, he's got his base built in. His supporters aren't going anywhere. But, and you would think that of the, I think, 17,000 votes, I might have the numbers wrong, but whatever he got there, it may be hard to grow that. You would think everybody within his congregation that wanted to vote for him did it. How does he appeal to the people who didn't vote, number one, the electorate that's registered but didn't vote, and to maybe some of Sheffield's voters now?
Well, I think I mean, to be honest, looking at the outcome of that election, I kind of wonder if all the members of his congregation even voted for him. And I'm sure it's probably a certainty that they all didn't. I've heard some rumblings, and I'm sure it's entirely possible that there may be some members of his church that think, you know, we want you here. We think your job should be to be pastor, not running the city. So I think for those that did vote for him, he's got to mobilize them, and he's got to encourage them to, it's like that old shampoo commercial. They've got to tell two friends, and they've got to tell two friends, and so on and so on and so on. I don't know that he did that, but he's got to do it now if he wants to win in November.
And we did notice he's already kind of changed some of his messaging. Originally, at least in the debate we had and throughout everything I saw, he said he would be a full-time mayor and still be full-time with the church. But since the primary's over, he's changed that to he's going to step away from the church a little bit, which would lead to what you just said. Maybe they don't like that, he could lose people going forward.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. It's definitely a possibility.
When you look at the mudslinging in the primary, it really wasn't a whole lot. A little bit came out near the end. So some might say a pretty clean round there. But what do you expect now that it's all on the line? Are we going to see a little bit more of that?
Well, I think the big question is, are there going to be further debates? And I don't know that that's a certainty, because that's really where you would tend to see a lot of that mudslinging occur. That, and also in marketing, things like radio and TV commercials which may specifically target a candidate. I don't know that there's going to be further debates, because I think it's entirely possible that Sheffield may argue, look, my margin of victory was so big that Detroiters have spoken. And a debate really only benefits Kinloch. It doesn't benefit Sheffield. So she may take the stance of, I don't want to do any debates. I don't know if she can get away with that, though, because there may be a number of people out there in the community that would say, look, we want to hear, you're the final two candidates. We want to hear from both of you. And you're doing the public a disservice if you don't agree to a debate. And I'm sure that Kinloch will push for one.
And there should be a lot of pressure. I mean, I'm sure the media will put a lot of pressure on them to have that debate.
Absolutely.
Looking forward, make the case for each of these candidates. I'll start with Sheffield, because you know specifically what it's like to go from city council president to the mayor's office.
Right.
If that happens with her, and given where the city is right now, what should be the top of her list should she win? And I'll ask you the same question about Reverend Kinloch.
So I think for her, it's about really distinguishing herself as not only a mayoral candidate, but someone that's likely to be the next mayor. What's unique and distinct about her, aside from the obvious? She's going to be the first female mayor of the city, and it's interesting because we haven't really seen a whole lot of attention and discussion given to that. But if she wins, and she's got a good shot, she's probably going to be the first female mayor. So aside from that, though, she's got, I think, start talking and articulating a bit more about what makes her unique. A big part of what I've seen in her campaign messaging is that she's worked very closely with Mayor Duggan. And that's good, but I think there are a lot of people that also want to say, okay, yeah, you supported Mayor Duggan, but what makes you you?
Yeah.
What are you going to do?
What else are you going to do?
Yeah, what's distinct about you? What's your platform, and what do you plan to do that's different?
And we have less than a minute. Should Kinloch win, how difficult will that transition be from somebody who's outside of government right now?
I think it's going to be difficult simply because of the learning curve. He's never held political office before. But I don't think, that should be totally held against him as a negative. I mean, he's clearly a businessman. I mean, he has a mega church.
Yeah.
They've got 6 active locations, so there's a certain amount of business acumen that goes along to managing a congregation that big, along with all the other projects and the work that they do. But I think he's got to look at probably hiring, if he were to get elected, a top flight hiring team to help him pick the best people.
Yeah. Well, we certainly appreciate your insight. Somebody who's been there and done that. Former City Council President and Mayor Ken Cockrel Jr. Thanks so much.
Yeah, no problem. Good to see you.
Good to see you. We're coming right back with more Flashpoint after this. 4 things in the headlines this week we wanted to mention before we get out of here this morning. I'm sure you noticed the air quality again this week. For several days, the metro was under an advisory, and some local officials, well, they finally had enough. Representative John James sending a letter this week to the Canadian Prime Minister regarding their firefighting game up there, saying, step it up. The Macomb County Public Works Commissioner, Candace Miller, also calling on Canadian Ambassador Pete Hoekstra to convey the same message. All this, as doctors are now warning this week, continued exposure to that wildfire smoke could have long-lasting health effects. Michigan Senator Alyssa Slotkin has been putting herself out there as one of the future leaders of the Democratic Party. She had a rough ride, though, on a recent episode of the Breaking Points podcast, and reaction to it went viral this week. The hosts were pressing her on Israel's handling of Gaza, where the number of people starving to death is growing. It was a pretty long interview, about 29 minutes, but I do want to play a chunk of it for you.
To me, the most important thing is a pressurized campaign to get aid into people who are starving. That, to me, is the number one, because that's the one is urgent and today. And that.
But will you cut off aid to Israel so long as they're committing crimes against humanity?
There is a difference between a weapon to protect a country from incoming missiles versus other type. Offensive and defensive weapons are different.
So would you support offensive weapons ban? Like, would you stop any offensive aid to Israel?
That certainly, to me, would be a place to look, but I'm not going to cut off a blanket next sale on a defensive weapon that comes through. No.
I also reject that because, for example, if, Senator Slotkin, if you were asked to support defensive weapons for Iran, defensive weapons for Russia, you wouldn't back that.
No, but Iran, but
they're defensive. They're just protecting civilians, right? So how is it different?
But because Israel's being shot at.
So is Russia.
So is Iran. Yeah. So is Russia.
Ukraine's shooting at Russia right now.
I'm sorry, this is the difference between allies, partners, and adversaries.
Following that appearance, Slotkin actually skipped a vote on blocking offensive weapons for Israel in favor of appearing on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. CARE Michigan also criticized her this week for denying false claims about Israeli airstrikes. Governor Gretchen Whitmer made another trip to the White House. No awkward photo ops to report this time, but she did convey to the president she thinks his tariffs would have a substantial effect on the state, and not in a good way, especially the auto industry. The governor using her unusually good relationship with Donald Trump to also warn about cuts to Medicaid. The governor saying she will continue to work with anyone if it benefits Michigan. She's also set up a commission to study the effects of tariffs on the state. Okay to say, it's the anonymous student safety tip line that began in 2014. Well, last year, it saw a 20% increase in volume. 11,671 tips were the most ever since that program began. Those tips led to weapons confiscations, drug and alcohol seizures, and behavior and suicide risk assessments in schools. So the upside, it's working. The downside is there's more to report than ever before. Folks, thank you so much for watching again. Hit me up with all of your emails to Flashpoint at clickondetroit.com, or you can always leave a comment on any of my socials. I'm Jason Colthorpe. We'll see you later.